Many thanks for those kind words. Today, I want to investigate some of the ways in which Persian painters tackled the actual process of erecting a building. This exercise will necessarily touch upon the vexed topic of what the term realism might signify in the context of medieval Persian painting. To keep the discussion within reasonable bounds, I want to concentrate on a trio of ambitious medieval attempts to tackle this subject, rather than draw up a roster of such scenes, which is a process that would privilege the pedestrian over the masterpiece. Nevertheless, I'll make a few brief references to comparative material. And so, to my first major example, apparently the earliest significant attempt in Persian painting to grapple with the many-faceted challenges of depicting workmen on a building site is found in a scene from the great Mongol Shahnameh, conventionally dated to the 1330s or 40s, 1320s to 30s. Its caption succinctly identifies it. Sakhtani Iskandar Sadi Ahanin Ra, the building by Alexander of the Iron Wall. Three other roughly contemporary Shahnameh manuscripts also depict this event. All of them are distinctly less accomplished. They're dated 1330, 1333, and 1341. They create a context which highlights the exceptional status of this Shahnameh. All three use the same pictorial format of a three-stepped right angle, with the right angle itself containing the savage tribes of Gog and Magog, enclosed by a wall and then a mountain range rendered as a set of overlapping technicolor triangles. If you can believe that mountains look like that, the moon is made of green cheese. The outermost part of each painting depicts the huge figure of the mounted Iskandar with attendants behind him. In the, come back, all is forgiven. Oh dear. Would it be possible for me just to say next? Otherwise, I'm going to lose a lot of time. Thank you. In the 1330 version, the mountains merge into a series of striped blue, red, and yellow triangles or squares, clearly intended to represent a wall. No sign of workmen. The tribes of Gog and Magog are reduced to a mass of white stick figures, gesticulating wildly against a background of colored red, brown, and black in turn, creating a sequence of separate compartments. The effect is distinctly eerie. In the 1333 version, next, the wall is crudely indicated by two adjoining bands, one yellow and the other decorated with a herringbone pattern. Four men in a row are engaged in placing roughly oval balloon-like boulders, colored yellow with an outer red band, against the wall. Here, too, the barbarians are undifferentiated, white figures seated in tiers. The 1341 painting, next, is somewhat more ambitious than this in its treatment of the barbarians, some of whom have the features of animals, together with sightless eyes that gives them a spectral character. The building of the wall is again suggested by workers, now only two of them, holding yellow and red boulders like inflated bolsters. No sign of iron. And all three pictures are fixated on the weird aliens of the steppe, rather than on anything as mundane as building a wall. So much for what one might term the competition. Far more is going on in in the story given in the Great Mongol Shahnameh. Its painted surface is twice as large. Next, even so, this scene is too crowded in its lower half to allow the painter full scope in recreating a busy building site. He has to bring in the wall itself, the mountain range, suitably miniaturized, over which it undulates, the desolate landscape beyond the wall, the weird nomads who live there, and of course, the dominant figure of Iskandar, plus two of his mounted retainers. All this leaves the painter too little space to make the most of a promising theme. The problem is compounded because the figures are too large in relation to the landscape, a convention that's standard in medieval Persian painting. Individual skills and tasks are on display, but their practitioners overlap too closely for the scene to reach its full potential. And while most of the 11 members of the construction team are shown in action, 3 of them are simply standing still. We might just be in Britain. That said, the painter has taken pains to depict a wide cross-section of workmen. Next. Not one of them could remotely be mistaken for a courtier. They differ not only in what they do, but also in their clothing and its coloring. The artist creates human interest by means of a series of distinct visual types. Some lean, some stocky, some heavily, but others lightly bearded, one with a wispy moustache and a goatee, and yet another clean-shaven. Behind these physical differences, one senses individual personalities. And the artist has made sure that they're all differently occupied as well. Some, like the 2 men with the bellows, are so absorbed in their work that they're unaware of Iskandar's presence. Next. Another, his cheek reddened from the heat of the forge, is caught in the act of turning around, while the blacksmith in the leather apron, an allusion perhaps to the heroic Kavi, looks up at Iskandar and gestures proudly towards his anvil. Next. The headgear of the workman is deliberately differentiated from that of other scenes in this manuscript. Turbans, white, blue, spotted, are worn casually, sometimes at a rakish angle. 3 men wear skull caps, striped blue and white. Others have a red pointed hat or a black toadstool-shaped one. The interest in ordinary people is a special feature of the Great Mongol Shahnameh and deserves more discussion than it's had so far. And it's an interest that triggers experiment. Next. Particularly impressive is the daring use of the full frontal mode for the man on the far side of the wall carrying a loaded basket on his head. Indeed, the artist displays a full repertoire of angles for the head and makes ample use of overlap. Next, depth is further and differently suggested, not just by the plunging coulisse system behind the wall, but by the wall itself, which, like the Great Wall of China, snakes its way round the hills and up to the top right of the painting. The repeated twists and turns and acute angles of the wall further increase the sense of depth. Next, and behind the furthest range of rolling hills lurk the unkempt, hirsute, goggle-eyed denizens of this untamed country, caricatured as barely human. So there's dynamism aplenty on both sides of the wall, and a strong sense of a job that really needs to be done. A job, moreover, that involves a variety of specialized skills. This is an artist who is grappling with what actually happens on a building site. The emphasis next on fire and heat is fully appropriate. After all, these people are building a wall of iron, not stone alone. The painter has responded imaginatively to the challenge of the poet's text, which is packed with hyperbole. For example, it says that the wall is 100 cubits wide and 500 cubits high. Not here, it isn't. And vividly evokes the wall rising amid leaping flames, encouraged by ghee, naphtha, and charcoal. And look at the plethora of tools on display: anvil, bellows, sledgehammers, hammers, mallets, pliers, chisels, and ladles for the molten metal. Next, the wall is shown as half finished. The two men on its further side are preparing the last courses, while behind them the wall has its triangular merlons in place. This then is a fully equipped construction team, and they're energetically at work. Next. And all this under the general direction of the ruler, who towers above them on his horse, accompanied by further horsemen. Together, they create a solid power block in opposition to the throng of laborers. Now that eloquently conveys the distance between the haves and the have-nots. Iskandar's huge golden halo and ultramarine robe suffice to single him out as sovereign. This story of his iron wall is found in other 15th century manuscripts. Broadly speaking, they go in for fantasy, for abstraction, for reduction, and simplification. And in so doing, they lose touch with the rough and tumble, the gritty reality, the messiness of the process of construction. To take a single example, the version of this theme found in an anthology from Yazd, dated 1407, next, features a mere 3 smartly dressed laborers, 2 carrying stones and 1 shaping the wall. No attempt to depict the complex process of construction. Instead, it's the antics of the tribes of Gog and Magog in their leafy loincloths and hats that dominate the painter's imagination. No wonder Iskandar places the finger of astonishment in his mouth. The vertical emphasis of this image sits uneasily with the idea of a long, broad wall. So there's an obvious discrepancy between the text and its pictorial equivalent. Now for my second example. It's from a copy of the Zafarnameh by Sharafuddin Ali Yazdi, dated 1467. The paintings themselves probably added a little later. Next. A close reading of them reveals some hitherto unexplored elements. The scene is a grand rendering of a grand theme, the construction of Timur's imperial mosque in Samarkand, named after his consort Bibi Khanum and begun in 1399. And its context is also grand for 2 reasons. First, all the other images in this manuscript are direct assertions of power, for they either show Timur holding court in the full panoply of royal pomp, or his victories in battle, appropriate themes to illustrate the Book of Victories. And second, this manuscript is unprecedented in confining its paintings to 6 double-page spreads distributed at fairly long intervals across the text. So there's an element of surprise when you come across them. So the choice of subject matter for this particular image is especially significant. It celebrates Timur's wealth, as witnessed by the lavish use of stone and marble. It also witnesses to his piety. It's a mosque. And the presence of multiple figures of authority is a reminder of the elite patronage that has made this building possible. Next. Moreover, to depict elephants at work, guided by mahouts, each wielding an ankus, in Central Asia, is a not-so-subtle reminder of the vast reach of the patron's resources. It also adds an attractively exotic touch. besides acting as a reminder of Timur's victorious campaign in northern India in 1398. Several of the marble workers are dark-skinned, and this may be a further South Asian reference. Indian craftsmen were, and still are, renowned for their skill in working marble, and Yazdi records that Timur gathered the Indian stonecutters in Delhi so that he could use them to work on the mosque in Samarkand. Both the foremost elephant, which seems to be moving at a lumbering trot, and the cart with a pair of massive multi-spoked wheels create visual drama of a high order. Next. The theme of victory is taken up explicitly by the Quranic inscription in the oblong portal over the arch of the sanctuary, the oblong panel over the arch of the sanctuary on the left-hand page. Surah 48, the Surah of Victory, verse 1. Surely we have given thee a manifest victory. But the inscription continues on the right-hand page, but the inscriptions are in the wrong order. The pictures should have been reversed. That's a really careless mistake. The paintings do not, and indeed can't, render the complete mosque, but at best, perhaps half of it. Next. After all, in actual fact, the portal to the covered sanctuary in the Mosque of Bibi Khanum, which in the left-hand page is at the top left corner of the picture, is set squarely where one would expect it to be, in the center of the Qibla side, and not to one end of it. Had the painter wanted to depict the entire mosque, he would have had to reduce the scale of his composition quite drastically. He could scarcely place that portal on the left, top left, in the gutter between the two leaves of his double-page spread, nor could he create a fold-out whose time had not yet come. That's not the only inconsistency. The painter has essentially chosen to depict two partially independent scenes, cherry-picking those elements of the mosque that he wished to emphasize. In short, he compromised, perhaps because he couldn't deliver a convincing image of the mosque in its entirety. Next. But there are elements linking the two pages, especially in the lower third, thanks to the ongoing activity of workers carrying slabs of stone or marble and the continuation of the outer wall of the mosque at the same height. And you'll notice there's a balance of colors. Next. But these gestures towards creating a single unified space falter in the upper two-thirds of both leaves, where on the right-hand page, a sharp disconnect makes itself felt in the abrupt termination of the inscribed frieze set above a row of columns, with the left-hand page having a blank wall in the corresponding place. That stark juxtaposition of unrelated spaces, one an open courtyard, the other an interior, makes no architectural sense at all. It's of a piece with the convention, perhaps it could be explained as a defective spatial sense, that makes the craftsman on both folios simply bulk too large for comfort or credibility. Next. Still more striking instances of such disproportion include the ladder towering over the entrance itself, or the standing figures above the portal arch. 4 of them, indeed, are depicted as having the same height as the columns themselves. On the right-hand page, attention focuses on the main entrance portal to the mosque, which occupies a central position on the page and is further singled out by the stumps of 2 flanking towers. Behind it, the viewer is invited to believe, There stretches one of the largest open courtyards in Iranian architecture, but only the eye of faith can picture that space. So, what can we say about the architecture that's the central theme of this double-page spread? The melancholy truth is that it simply doesn't work. This failure is only partially to do with the lack of a consistent scale, nor can it be blamed on the absence of a consistent perspectival system, whether or not that's a Western one, or even an indifference to issues of space. It's due to the painter's fundamentally feeble grasp of the architecture that surrounded him. He was far less interested in the architecture itself than in the people swarming all over it. Next. A simple diagnostic detail betrays the painter's uncertain grasp of basic architectural principles. It's the depressed, pointed arch of almost Tudor profile of the sanctuary portal at top left. That is demonstrably inaccurate, for this very portal actually survives. Next. This is my own pre-restoration photograph, which I took in 1966. And its arch profile is not even vaguely reminiscent of the form that the painter has rendered. The same goes for the arches at top right. No such profile exists anywhere in Timurid architecture. And a painter working in Herat, as this one probably did, would have seen Timurid buildings with authentic Timurid arches all around him. What was wrong with him? Was he blind? The tally of these inconsistencies and downright howlers is damaging enough, and it would be petty to anatomize them as if this were standard Timurid architecture in which fantasy easily supersedes observation. But these two paintings don't really fit that familiar pattern, for they purport to describe the construction of an actual building which any contemporary visitor to Samarkand could see. This is not the architecture of fantasy. It was the city's biggest mosque, which had been raised almost within living memory. It was a dynastic symbol. Next. And it's the juxtaposition of carefully observed small-scale realia with an inadequately conceived rendering of large-scale architecture that creates a discordant note. This painted building, then, comprises a succession of almost random individual elements rather than an integrated whole. There are too many sleights of hand, so the architecture of the mind trumps the actual architecture of everyday life. The painter was fully in command of individual details, but the big picture escaped him. And part of the problem, of course, is that both pictures are uncomfortably crowded, with its people piled almost on top of one another in disagreeably close proximity. The reason is not far to seek. The painter has, it seems, miscalculated and has made them a little too big for the space that they occupy. One must also reckon with the pressure of the unseen space, the space of the imagination at either side of each folio. Next, for he uses the frame like a guillotine, cutting the elephant in two, and most daringly, all the body of the Mahout, who is guiding the second elephant, and all we see of him is his amputated arm, wielding the ankus. Elsewhere, other figures are cut in two and feet are clipped. This double-age spread, next, is notable too for the presence of no less than 8 men who are doing nothing at all except giving orders. So in human, as distinct from architectural terms, the exercise of authority vies with hard labor as the subject of the painting. A key figure here is the overseer, silhouetted in the darkness of the doorway at top left of the left-hand page, brandishing his staff pour encourager les autres. This is not an expressionless stock figure. He's scowling ferociously at the cringing man who has stopped chipping away at a block of stone to meet his gaze and who is certainly about to be chastised. 8 overseers then coordinate 27 workmen in this pair of paintings. The implication is clear. The patron was keeping an eagle eye on the progress of work on this great mosque. Next. Note, too, the inconsistency of depicting most of the workmen as barefoot, but also as strangely overdressed, given the kind of hard physical work in which they're engaged. Colors are very varied, and so are the materials worn by the labor force. Sartorial distinctions between the shod and the unshod are inconsistent, but almost all of those wearing boots exercise authority. That's worth remembering. Both their clothing and their headgear being significantly more formal than that of the workers. We have here the skeleton of a mosque which has been finished, and it's time for the applied decoration to be put in place. So the emphasis is divided between actual building activity and the depiction of, or preparatory work on, individual panels. There's one of porphyry and several of stone or marble to be seen. Next. At the junction of 2 exterior walls, and forgive me for this poor quality, is a minaret, maybe 3.5 feet high and 2 feet across, extraordinarily small, decorated with tile mosaic cartouches set in a broad brick lattice, a technique that's indeed found at the Bibi Khanum Mosque and in time became very fashionable in Timurid architecture. But the main focus is on marble. That's what pushed up the costs. Next. Its sheer weight is vividly conveyed in the bottom right-hand corner by the pair of workmen at full stretch trying to lift a panel. One of them is bent double with the strain. Several workmen are shaping or incising the slabs using a varied assortment of chisels, right angles, hammers, and little picks. In a homely touch, one uses his naked foot to steady the slab on which he's working. At the top of the left-hand page, and segregated from the marble workers, is a group of carpenters plying their trade. One planes a plank, that's the only plane found in medieval Persian painting. Another employs an adze to shape a second plank, while yet another is using his saw on a third one. Note that all 3 have different poses and use different tools. It's as if they stand symbolically for a much larger number of carpenters similarly occupied. This method of making the few do duty for the many is found in all 3 of the paintings I analyze here. Next. Now to my third example. This image of workmen constructing the storied pre-Islamic Iraqi palace of Quranic is from the British Library manuscript of Nizami's Khamsa, dated 1494-5, made in Herat for a Timurid Amir. And it's become an iconic example of Persian miniature painting at its most accomplished. I'm sure most of you have seen it already. Yet despite its importance, it seems never to have been analyzed in print at appropriate length, though many scholars have published in passing significant insights. One aspect of this painting that particularly repays investigation is the visual calcs of figures in the Zafarname scene I've just analyzed. Next, examples of these echoes, sometimes lightly disguised, include the man with bent back, carrying a long pack, the man standing on 2 rungs of the ladder, the black man carrying a water skin, the man placing a brick flat on in the crown of the arch, that's outside this picture, and the pair of men mixing mortar, ditto. But despite these echoes, the two paintings, the Zafarname and the Nizami, are fundamentally different, both in tone and in a formal sense. In the matter of tone, the Zafarname double-page composition depicts the building process top-down, with a plethora of overseers. And many of the workers, as I said, are inappropriately well-dressed. The Quranic composition, in contrast, presents it bottom-up. Crucially, there's no sign of anyone exercising overall supervision of the work. Next. Moreover, virtually nobody is well-dressed. Indeed, 2 of them are stripped to the waist, one with a brand of a horseshoe. Only 2 of the workmen wear turbans, and only 2 are not barefoot. Many are bare-legged. The Zafarname image suggests compulsion. This image suggests cooperation. As for the formal difference between this image and the other that you've just seen, our artist here has sidestepped the spatial problems that bedeviled the painter of the Samarkand Mosque by making the bold decision to render the building as virtually a flat facade. Next. This is a remarkable way to depict a 3-dimensional Timurid structure like, next, this one in Chimkent of the tomb of Yasavi. So for all the ostentatious realism devoted to depicting the activities of the workmen, their actions take place against an essentially flat backdrop. Attention has drifted away from the building itself. In this respect, the painting is rooted in the distinctively 2-dimensional approach which Timurid painters brought to the depiction of architecture, even when they depicted contrasting planes. Compare our image here with that of the Quranic Palace, the same building, in the St. Petersburg Hamza of 1431. Next. Its 2 angled walls, faced with square panels containing geometric motifs and separated by glazed hexagonal plugs, with an Arabic inscription band above in tile mosaic, extolling the mighty Sultan, king of the necks of the nations, is topped by an improbable confection of 6 domes in variegated colors. It's not difficult to see why these people are gazing at this building with such admiration, craning their necks for a better view. The contrast with a later painting of what is notionally the same building is striking. Next. Can one glean any information about the artist's mindset from the painting itself? First of all, the picture radiates heat. The very color scheme emphasizes that this is heavy, unremitting toil in uncomfortably hot weather. Next, the building in the making dominates the picture space through its width and height. And finally, the painter concentrates all his attention on the workforce and its variegated activities. In his view, that is plainly a subject perfectly appropriate in itself. The building is set against an azure sky with no competition in the way of landscape or other subsidiary themes. So there are no spectators, this in a style of painting where they were a standard feature, and no hint of a wider context. Next, let's return to in this respect, The painting is at the opposite pole to the 1431 version of the same scene. Next. No, previous. Previous. That's it. This earlier painting relegates the people present to the status of spectators, grouping them into a tight and rather inert bunch of 10 people all rubbernecking at the finished building. Their clothing marks them as members of the social elite. Next. The later picture contains 21 figures, which is more than twice as many as the earlier one. Moreover, every one of those 21 people is actually doing a job of work. And practically all the available space is taken up in the process. So in two distinct ways, the later version illustrates some of the step changes which Timurid painting experienced in the course of the 15th century. First, the interest in realia, and secondly, the marked increase in the number of figures in a given painting. The immediate impression generated by this extraordinary painting is of an overturned anthill. Everyone is in a frenzy of activity, so that at first the eye is led in numerous different directions, but in none for long. On closer examination, you recognize a circular movement. Moreover, the range of activities depicted is so wide that it becomes plain that all of them have been very carefully calculated in advance, despite the impression of chaos that the picture exudes at first sight. So this is organized chaos. Is there a hierarchy of workers operative here, from those who mix the earth and carry it, all at the bottom, to the master mason shaping a brink at the very top of the picture? He is, after all, one of only two people in the painting with footwear. Next, the picture takes us through all the stages of building and does so with an S shape found elsewhere in late Timurid painting. In short, it's an innovative picture, well-nigh revolutionary, in that it gives pride of place not to the palace itself, the notional subject, but to the workers who create it. Next. Suddenly, the painter forsakes surface glamour and takes us behind the glittering facade, simply by turning the clock back. This image projects a strong sense of a self-governing community, a communist paradise, if you like, without a stick-wielding brute of the type who oversees the building of the mosque in Samarkand. Instead, the message seems to be that if everyone works together, it really will be possible to achieve something. The sense of a brotherhood is strengthened by the presence of different ethnicities united by a common goal, and also by signs of different degrees of wealth. Some have shoes, some have not. Some are stripped to the waist, some have bright clothing, others are clothed in dun colors. These are normal people. Perhaps there's more to be teased out of these remarks. This palace is plainly raised from the earth itself, and that is a reminder of what most Persian palaces are originally made of, and to which they will in time revert. Dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. The lack of ornamentation defies the standard Timurid iconography for depicting buildings, of which this painter must have been very well aware. The painter has reminded us of what lies behind the glittering public facade of a rich palace, and probes the reality behind the surface luxury of a great building. It underlines the fact that the iconic monuments of the elite actually rest, and here let me quote some well-tried Marxist language, on the sweat of the toiling masses. It's also a reminder to practice humility and to recognize the contribution, the vital contribution, of the working man. The rich depend upon the poor rather more than the poor depend upon the rich. And as it happens, this image irresistibly recalls the tale of the great contemporary vizier, patron of poets, renowned intellectual, Mir Ali Shir Navoi, hitching up his robe to get his hands dirty in repairing the Friday Mosque of Herat, an obvious lesson in humility. The speed with which, thanks to his example and his leadership, the repairs were completed excited much admiration at the time. As it happens, damn it, this painting was completed at least 3 years before that event, before the repairs on the Friday Mosque began. But it's a prequel. The Quranic image remains a vivid metaphor of social cohesion. And it poses a silent challenge. Whose side are you, the viewer, on? Would you just watch, or would you pitch in? Where do your sympathies lie? This discussion might imply that the painter of the Quranic image went out of his way to depict as best he could things that actually were. Next, but if there is realism here, it's realism of a very particular kind. For in real life, these figures would not all be doing something different, nor would they be so brightly dressed, nor would all their poses be different. Why is this? And why are so many activities shown taking place simultaneously? The painter cannot depict literally thousands at work, but he has a pretty good try. And this is a practical way of suggesting much more than he actually depicts. And that explains the self-consciously varied poses adopted by the workers. It's as if the painter were methodically making his way through a well-rehearsed lexicon of possible poses and making sure that every one was included somewhere in the painting. That's not to say that the painter had closely observed the human body in all these poses. Far from it. His vision is simplified, almost abstracted. Often he deals in the coin of quotation rather than observation. Many people have no neck. Tough. Note the lack of musculature or the tendency to ignore the ankle in favor of creating an undifferentiated, rounded L shape for the lower leg and foot, as if beneath the flesh were a single bone, continuous. The absence of texture in the treatment of flesh is noticeable, especially since the barks and knots of the scaffolding poles are lovingly rendered. Why is he more interested in wood than people? And suddenly your attention is caught by an unexpected detail like that horseshoe brand on the legs of 2 of the men and on the arm of a 3rd. Well, all this variety feeds the intrinsic dynamism of the piece. People matter. That's the message. This painting is not about the pride of the patron. It does not vaunt what his wealth will buy. It's about work. This scene could almost be replicated today. The use of a dun background is also absolutely accurate, since by the late 15th century, the day of the carved or glazed plug between bricks had gone, and facades were now rigorously plain while they awaited their technicolor cladding. This allows the bright colors judiciously scattered throughout the painting to stand out and to keep the eye permanently on the move. How well do you think the painter understood the technical side of the building trade? Next. There's a strange inconsistency in the actions of the men located under the text panel. They're shaping roughly squared blocks, but what's the material? It can't be fired bricks, since they need no further shaping and they're in a standard size. It could be stone, but in Iran that material is mainly used for foundations, and this building has already gone up. Another possibility is mud brick, which is indeed shaped in just the way depicted here. But this facade is a facade of a building that was 20 stories high and famous for centuries. If it had been made of mud brick, it wouldn't have worked. And the building itself is unequivocally made of courses of fired brick. Next. The man in red casting up a square block must be sending a brick up to a higher person, and the master mason at the top of the scaffolding giving a finishing touch with his pick to the brick he holds in his hand before putting it into place is another significant detail in that context. In short, what the painter has done is to transpose into a thoroughly inappropriate baked brick context a technique which he may very well have seen practiced in mud brick construction, another very serious mistake. Next, it seems then that the painter inadequately understood the art of building, unlike this Japanese artist of the 19th century, since the devices in an undated but medieval image in an album in Istanbul, next, the work of a painter who conscientiously wanted to record exactly what he was seeing, are not on show. You don't see those instruments on this building site. But the painter of the Quranic scene had definitely visited a building site, next, and had watched, look at the man in red, workmen throwing up bricks to their colleagues above. Similarly convincing is his rendering of the two men with long-handled staves who are mixing mortar. A third bends low to add more ingredients to the mixture, while a fourth brings in a water skin from the side. So if this can't be called a manual for the building trade, it is at least an accurate recreation of a building in progress, though the painter has wisely refrained from delving into architectural detail. Next. Even so, his precarious scaffolding has some comically redundant poles. It doesn't work. This is Quranic, though, before the decoration which made it proverbial was applied. Time to finish. What conclusions can be drawn from the evidence I've presented? The wider context of the paintings analyzed above, especially those from the Zafarnameh and the Khamsa, embraces numerous political, social, technical, even emotional issues. So naturally, it raises many more questions than I could tackle here. I've confined myself to the close focused study of a trio of masterpieces, and that study may serve as a reminder of how many-layered, complex, and challenging such paintings with their massive detail can be, just like the texts that accompany them. They are at once allusive and elusive. They deserve, along with many other 14th to 15th century Persian paintings, far more attention and analysis than they've so far received. And the rewards of minutely examining them are abundant. For the more you look, the more you see. The conventions that these paintings obey are idiosyncratic and sometimes hard to fathom. But the great masters knew how to communicate their messages within and through these conventions, and thus to give later generations authentic and piercing insights into a long-vanished world. Thank you.